Maria Romero has 90 days to find a job, or she gets deported. In December, the Mexico City native got her MBA with a concentration in marketing analytics from Philadelphia's Drexel University. She is young, she is educated, she has in-demand skills. That is the exact kind of immigrant that Americans across the political spectrum say we want more of. But she's nervous. It is February when Technically's newsroom first meets her. 30 days left. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Higher interest rates have made the go-go tech boom of the 2010s over. There is volatility everywhere. Her STEM degree and F1 visa means that for years, she can work essentially like an American citizen. No additional cost for an employer, no sponsorship costs. But she's nervous that anti-immigrant rhetoric is making an already tough hiring climate worse. Forget about paying her bills if she doesn't find a job. She gets kicked out of a city, out of a country she was just beginning to call home. All told, she will apply to 500 jobs. She'll do coffee meetings, she'll text with friends, she will have her story told by a local news outlet. It won't do all that she wants initially. But what Maria's story can represent can be tech jobs, it can be immigration policy. Maria's story can also tell something about storytelling, which is what I aim to do now, with some data, as Danya so kindly pointed out. So, if you're paying attention at all, your brain just did something remarkable. When we look at your brain, any of our brains, under an fMRI machine while listening to a story, you don't hear it like an observer. Under an fMRI machine, our brains light up when we're hearing the story as if we're an active participant in the story. That's what changes. When someone's telling a story, you feel more focused, and then I break out and walk over here to pull data and you fall out of it. That's what just happened. Your brain initially is sitting as if you're an active participant in that story, and when I break, it's gone. You lose it. What you just experienced is what storytelling does. And that is why we didn't evolve to rely on storytelling to escape reality like we so often think. We evolved to rely on storytelling to help navigate reality. That kind of helps get us to what we want to offer as a definition of storytelling. Storytelling is a practice of using character and plot to share ways to navigate a complex world. This idea is so ancient that one theory holds we didn't develop storytelling after language, but instead we invented language to advance storytelling, to try to share bits of culture and insights about survival. And yet we overlook it. As Daniel Taylor famously wrote, humans live in story the same way that fish live in water. It's everywhere, so it's invisible. We will do meetings next week about product launches and press releases and grant reports, and we won't really think about the story of it, which is all that we know captures attention and navigates reality. We'll say, marketing will deal with that. But that misunderstands what storytelling is. We constantly think of storytelling as an output of stuff we do, but storytelling is an input. It's how we make sense of the world, it's how we then move forward. So anyone in the business of motivating people, entrepreneurs, ecosystem builders, but anyone in the business of motivating people should get that storytelling isn't new age bullshit. I know it. When you have that word storytelling that feels kind of jargony, you're like, it seems like a cute thing. It's wrong. It's foundational to our experience with the world. So storytelling isn't just marketing. Great marketers, understand storytelling, but storytelling is a practice, like being data-backed is a practice. It's not a department, it's a worldview. So storytelling is an ancient brain-wired practice of sharing how to navigate a complex world. Storytelling is essentially an exchange. If you give people what might be insight about their world, which can include bits of culture, but if you share generously things about the world, you get attention in return. And that is an opportunity to change minds for good and for bad. So technically, we do storytelling in a very particular way. We happen to do storytelling in a journalistic way. driven by an ethical framework. But this is not a conference about journalism. It's a conference about storytelling, about what it can do for entrepreneurs, for ecosystems, and for our homes. So lots of practices do storytelling. We technically happen to be a news organization, but this is not a news organization conference. It's about a practice that we use, and many of you do too. A bunch of fresh research backs this up as not the rantings of a deranged 16-year running publisher. A paper just from March that my dear friend Andy Stoll shared with Annika and I analyzed regional branding campaigns in Germany. 3 very clear points from the research. 1, local stories change local identity. 2, authentic people stories do this best. 3, over time, stories about a local place's reputation shapes its reputation outside the world. Storytelling is not an output. Storytelling is an input. That's, if nothing else, the fundamental change that I want us to have. But most local places lost most of their professional storytellers. We used to call them local journalists. The local reporters who survived and the independent creators who are thriving are not likely to solve spontaneously our challenges with storytelling about our local economies for entrepreneurs and ecosystem builders. So it's going to be up to us. Second, story screenshot. My link broke. It's a file name. Second, we can document the impact. Technically is today releasing our first analysis demonstrating what storytelling does for place-based economic development. This is going to get real nerdy for a second, but I'll point out a story published today. Yeah, I haven't already been really nerdy, just to be clear. That was the sexy part. This is the data. Fresh story on technically published today outlines this data in greater detail, so you can get this in considerable more detail, but let me give you a high level. So, according to our new analysis, even a small news resource focused on and engaged in an entrepreneurship and tech ecosystem moves at least 2 quantifiable metrics. The amount of additional news coverage from other publications over time and overall ecosystem size. To get this, our analysis first looked at over 50 states and regions, but then narrowed into 6 pairs, so 12 ecosystems that were enough like for like that we could do this work. In 2010, each pair had roughly the same population, same economic makeup. The pairs also had in 2010 a similar number of local startup stories indexed by Google News, which is a decent proxy for high quality national and local information providers. Over the next several years, 1/2 of each of these pairs got a dedicated news resource to its startup and tech ecosystem. 3 of those were technically markets, but 3 of them are not. Guess what happened in all of them? By 2024, the places with a dedicated news resource had an average of 58% more stories about their ecosystems than homegrown startups. This is what you're seeing here. This is basically each paired region. Pittsburgh and Cleveland, once a storyteller was introduced, 5 to 7 years later, had almost twice as many stories than Cleveland did, though they started the same base. You work all the way down, Delaware and Rhode Island, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Atlanta, Dallas, New Jersey, and Connecticut. They all start from the same base, same number of stories, same economic mix. By 5 to 7 years later, we can quantify meaningful change in how many other national industry publications are writing about them, and with another proxy metric, even individual creators. So, some of you might say, neat, the story guy likes stories. I get that. So, after 10 years, we also see economic change too with the news resource. The half of these pairs that had, this is further data, but the half of these pairs that had the ecosystem storytelling was on average almost twice as big an ecosystem. So Pittsburgh and Cleveland looked very similar 10 years ago. 10 years later, Pittsburgh has meaningfully beat it. This is using Startup Genome Project data, our friends at Startup Genome Project, tally up startup valuations and exits. Not bullshit data, real change. Of course, there's some causation and correlation, which is why I think this is just the beginning of us trying to quantify this work. You can sensibly say, as an ecosystem gets more established, more stories follow as those companies get realer. And I'd say, yes, that's the point. Just like we care about early stage investment in capital, early stage investment in storytelling is where the world starts shifting for your ecosystem. This is averaging out those, the startup ecosystem size over 10 years. So we see a bit of a lag. You can look at the data and see 5 to 7 years, you see the storytelling impact happen. By 10 years, you see the ecosystem change happen. So this is an average of our pairs, a $45 billion average startup ecosystem. Again, startup genome data, mixing up startup valuations and exits. And those paired regions without a storytelling resource, closer to 20 billion in average size of their startup ecosystems. So it's meaningful, it's foundational. I just happen to like, this broke a little bit too. I have love for Phoenix. If any of this gets recorded, it goes to Danielle. Danielle, I love what you're doing in Phoenix. But for me, Philadelphia and Phoenix, a very interesting case study. This chart's broken here in the visual, but in 2010, Phoenix is a bit smaller in population, it's a bit smaller in economic rate of growth. And then Phoenix has this outstanding period of 2010s. Massive population growth, at that point it passes Philadelphia in population size, its economic size grows. But the two key points at the bottom of the chart you don't see are ecosystem size and the number of stories about the Philadelphia tech ecosystem. Philadelphia is now triple Phoenix's numbers. So for me, this is the best and rawest comparison I can have. Phoenix beats Philadelphia in every economic measure we can track, except for startup ecosystem growth and the storytelling about it. It is one of the best and clearest indicators that over time, storytelling shapes an identity, which we now have research that points out, and over time boosts connectivity. Here, Maria Romero is worth returning to. If politics are downstream of culture, so too is economic development. She's a case study that many of us have in all of our ecosystems. Maria first visits Philadelphia because of a family connection. Kind of random sauce we see. Opportunity. She essentially comes as a tourist. She was taken by the food, the art, and the culture. Fun fact, the first time I did a builder's keynote, I didn't have water. And I literally could not talk by the end of it, so I remember water down it. I'm chatty. So she first comes to Philadelphia as an outsider. She's from Mexico City. She comes kind of randomly as a tourist. The food and culture is there. All of us have done that. We go to some place, like, I like this place. Sure, neat. Kind of end of the story. But then university moves her a little bit farther down the field. She decides she wants to study in the US. She looks at one of the universities. Step 2, a little bit deeper down that funnel. We all see that. But then as she started to decide whether she'd look for work here, she did what any sane professional does. She Googled shit at 3 a.m. when she's stressed. It's where she finds stories of tech jobs in Philadelphia. She reads about employers. She got a sense that there's a mix of the culture she liked with the commerce she'd need for her job. And so this urbane native of an international city decides, I could live here. She told technically that she liked Philadelphia's underdog spirit, this personality here. Every one of our ecosystems has those kind of catchwords. And that's what we want someone to do. I visited, neat. I stayed a little bit longer at university, neat. But we find the storytelling gap. If you lack that, you keep losing people. There's no kind of down funnel moment for that person to learn a little bit more about ecosystem. How do I learn about it? And I don't think that you can just say, as the ecosystem leader alone, we're great. I believe that independent storytelling does it best, the research shows. Okay, you're like, all right, man, storytelling is important, data works. What are we actually talking about? Let's get into those specifics. So everybody recognizes the platforms. When we think storytelling, I know that's what first comes to mind, and that makes sense. Live events, we do storytelling, newsletters, websites, social, podcasts and series, video. These are all tools, makes sense. But I think this misses 2 other big components of storytelling. We're very focused on where we'll do storytelling. We don't spend a lot of time sitting on the what we're telling, what story we're telling, and who is listening. This is what I think storytellers are essentially very good at, thinking about those 2 ends. But when someone says, oh, it's very easy to open a Twitter account, or I launched a newsletter, or the boss wants a podcast, we sit a lot with where we're telling that story, not what we're telling or who is listening. So in the story that was published today, and technically, God bless Danya and her editing my madness, much deeper, thorough research that outlines more of this, but a couple points here in my last leg of remarks before we dive into a conversation about it. Lots of data and tactics inside the piece, but let's do 3 touch points. Yeah, this is kind of an insane storytelling process thing. If you're like more rankings of a maniac, the point here is this is what storytelling as input looks in my mind. It's a constant cyclical process. We're listening to people. We essentially want to categorize it in some form. Us in journalism do it different than qualitative researchers, do it different than ecosystem builders. But how do I categorize what we're hearing from people? Then that catalog and the categories, we create themes. Oh, everyone says this about our ecosystem. Oh, people are constantly saying this. I'm trying to get thematic sense out of the individual bits of feedback I get from people. Then we want to analyze that. Does the data back that up? That's where I think it does help to have real data tied in. Does the data confirm the stories we're telling? And then we go back to listening. But all throughout that, there's a published story. Publish the story as often as we can to get additional feedback. And so the loop grows round what we should be publishing, whether it be on your social platforms or a news site. Storytelling is like diet and nutrition. You cannot spend months thinking about eating healthy, then do it for a day or a month and say, gee, golly, I look great. We know this is a lifestyle. It is small and consistent steps. Storytelling is very similar. You're going to constantly be listening. Many of the entrepreneurs in the room, I see nodding heads. A lot of this will look familiar to customer feedback loop. It's very similar to ecosystem builders. It's a constant loop. Just a storytelling tactic. But storytelling needs stakes. And this is why I think brands are so often bad at telling their own story. Why I think economic development orgs don't always do it well. Why I don't think entrepreneurs always do it well. The only reason, as I open these remarks with, the only reason any of us are actually ever listening to a story is about finding ways to survive. That is our evolutionary reason why storytelling is effective. We are only, the reason you like true crime podcasts, I'm sorry to say, is you are essentially sitting and wondering, what would I do when that maniac comes at me? That is what you're drawn into. And so at all times, the only reason anyone is ever listening to a story is how does this relate to my own life? So storytelling is default generous. It has to be about, this is what it means for an audience. But brands or fights over press releases are deeply selfish. They're very much like this. What has to go in the story? Oh, we got to get the VP's quote in there, or she'll be mad. That is so selfish. It's why press releases are so heavily read by people who work at a place and read by no one else. That's because they are selfish, and storytelling must be generous. Storytelling is also an effective tool, especially for entrepreneurship and technology, because many of us work in deeply technical, very complicated, very narrow fields. Ecosystem leaders and startups can begin with the humanity of their entrepreneurs. Kaufman Foundation in 2019 released their Ecosystem Builders Playbook. Shout out to Victor and Andy. And storytelling was there because they needed to constantly go back to the humanity. If you don't actually understand the core technologies that your entrepreneurs are working on, if you don't understand the arcane policy that you're developing, the humanity of the people in your ecosystem is what matters most. And so to put together the storytelling process with those key questions are that we should be in constant loop, publishing to get feedback, but also sharing to make a more transparent and accessible ecosystem. So let's return to Maria. I texted her a few days left. She was still determined and optimistic days before she had reached her deadline. And in a slow growth region, in a low growth state, Philadelphia's population has grown the last 20 years for two demographic reasons. Young people stayed and more immigrants came. The technology community over the last 20 years in this ecosystem, like many others, credibly grew in a region that did not otherwise grow. So if you lose Maria, a young immigrant from an international city with a graduate program who is working in tech, if you can't retain her, you're in trouble. And it was not looking good until the very last minute. And then, she got a call. She was offered and accepted a marketing analytics job at Anthropology. It's part of Urban Brands. It's an example of a very large corporate employer who's been in this region for many decades, who over time has had to build up a technology practice. They're essentially a tech employer now. She gets to stay. Her skills stay here. Her story reshapes this region's narrative, like many people in your own regions can do the same. Because now the data prove it. Philadelphia as a region can attract and retain graduate-level analytics talent from Mexico City. Universities matter. Arts and culture matter. Direct flights matter. Ecosystem building and entrepreneurship matter. The mix of large employers and small interacting together, hence ecosystem building. Storytelling essentially matters. How Maria shaped her narrative of a place, how her story shapes our understanding of that place alongside it. So to close, storytelling is a practice of using character and plot to share ways to navigate a complex world. It is the only reason any of us are watching what we do. Fiction or nonfiction, our brains see no difference. We're processing story in the exact same way. We are situating ourselves in that story. It's when you feel disconnected from the story and someone else feels connected, they just see themselves in that story differently than you do. It's easier for you to place yourself in that. Storytelling is an output. It's not an output, it's an input. It should be inputting into your identity of your ecosystem. And if you're not telling your story, then someone else is controlling your story. If you are not telling your story, then someone else is controlling your story. Local news is been gutted. National media is overrun. Even individual content creators have many other priorities. I don't think there's another solution other than us telling our own story. An investment in storytelling gives your region and your residents more attention, as documented in the data, and grows the economic pie as we begin to tell that story. Today's conference will explore how to do that better for entrepreneurs and ecosystem builders. Our stories matter. Thank you. A conversation with Dr. Vanessa Chen from the University of Pennsylvania, mixing from Nearstar Fusion, an entrepreneur and an ecosystem builder. So can you give them another round of applause as we offer this? Hi, friends.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
Come sit. Okay, so nothing. Well, I was supposed to put some water in there, but then I didn't. So yeah, the mugs are very cute.
They are cute.
All right, so our job here is to help set up the day's conference, and our focus, I'm asking your help to help translate whatever the heck that was into kind of practical reality for kind of like chief, very much national and also institutional level ecosystem builder and entrepreneur working in, may I say, arcane industry and how that explanation's happened. So to first, help me set up the stage, give a little bit of Dr. Chen, who the heck are you? Why you're here, give a little of that journey, I'll then go to me, and we'll set up the conversation.
Sure, so I am the inaugural Vice Dean for Innovation Entrepreneurship at Penn School of Engineering. I just started a little less than 4 months ago, and I was on leave of absence because the last 4 years I was appointed by President Biden to be the Chief Commercialization Officer for the U.S. Department of Energy, where my goal was to take the $500 billion we got from Bill and IRA to actually commercialize all the clean energy technologies across the nation. So I did a lot of ecosystem storytelling there.
Hello, my name is Amit Singh. I'm the CEO of Nearstar Fusion. We're a deep tech company in Virginia, and we're trying to build fusion power plants using hypervelocity railguns. Prior to joining Nearstar, I was actually in the intelligence community for 25 years, and I love that space. But one of the things I realized being there as long as I was is that I felt like most of the world's problems were rooted in the scarcity of energy. And so when I had this opportunity to make a major pivot in life, I really wanted to tackle fusion energy because nothing can change the world more than what fusion energy is. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. All right, let's do a bit of storytelling. Dr. Chen, help me out. You've worked in very narrow, meaningful industries. Help kind of share where storytelling shows up in your work.
Narrow? I don't think that yours is
Fair
narrow.
enough.
Okay.
I'm just saying, we're not doing TikTok dances. You're working in a very specific granular field.
Who says we're not doing TikTok dances?
I've been fact-checked. I appreciate that.
Okay, so really kind of my passion has been around how do you commercialize technologies from labs into the marketplace. And when you're doing commercialization, you're moving from research to development to demonstration to deployment. And the challenge we have is that, I have a PhD. When you have your PhD, you spend all your time doing research and development. No one teaches you anything about the real world and how to get to demonstration deployment. So really what I'm trying to do is figure out how do we change things so we actually can go from research to development and demonstration deployment. Okay, I just did a bunch of gobbledygook. You guys have no idea what I'm talking about, so I'm going to try it in a different way. Raise your hand if you know who Thomas Edison is. Keep your hand up if you know that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. You are all wrong. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. In fact, Jonathan Swan invented the light bulb. Jonathan Swan is the person who knew that if you were to carbonize a piece of paper and pass electricity through it, you would be able to have light come out of it. Now, he did research in a lab, figured this out, but that's it. Thomas Edison saw it and was like, oh my goodness, this could change the world. I need to figure out how to actually bring this light bulb to the real world. So he figured out we needed this filament to last longer. So he was like, we have to pull a vacuum on it. I have to figure out how do I make the light bulb in a way that's manufactured that is cost effective so everyone can actually use it. Third, I have to tell utilities to actually no longer pipe gas into homes, but to pipe electricity into the homes so we actually can use this everywhere. That's really hard to do. But that is why all of you think that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, because he deployed the light bulb. He did the last stage of commercialization. So what I'm trying to do is take Jonathan Swan's and make them into Thomas Edison's.
Well, and actually, I love that example. Can I even push? Because you might expect that I have a take on the Edison line, because how do we know Edison's story? There's this like world of professional storytellers who follow Edison. Edison is like very Jobs-like, and he was a marketer above all else. That nickname he has, the Wizard of Menlo Park, it is from a local newspaper, uses that nickname in print, and he's like, I'm gonna run with this. And he then like crafts these gatherings of storytellers and is a master kind of controller of narrative that I think speaks to that part of deployment that we don't always talk about, like how do then you tell that story? And I'm just like, that's one reason that Edison became so iconic. It didn't happen accidentally. It happened because he was crafting a story around himself.
Or I would say it differently, which is I think because he was a storyteller, he was able to bring ecosystems together, because he was inspiring people in terms of here's my vision of what we have to do. Because he had to get so many people across the entire ecosystem aligned so that we actually could have light everywhere. Whereas, Jonathan Swan, he invented it, but he didn't know how to deploy it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the important thing, is that in PhDs, we actually are teaching people how to do the really deep research, but we don't tell them why it's going to make a difference in the world. And that is where storytelling comes in, and why I'm so excited about my new role here at Penn.
I love that. I won't say the word narrow now, but help us, like how does storytelling show up when you are, as many are in this field, are entrepreneurs filling a very specific market niche, but you also want to tell a story to investors, stakeholders, at cocktail parties. How's like storytelling been part of that role for you?
Well, it's my primary role as a deep tech firm that is pre-revenue, and it's going to be pre-revenue for many years. You have to be able to attract investors, and a lot of times investors, they see a lot of different tech, and so when they come and ask you what makes your tech special, if you drone on about plasma densities and magnetic fields and flux capacitors, you've lost them. They don't really understand that. But when you tell them, hey, instead of using 50 tons of coal, you could power an entire data center with just this much fuel, or you could send a human to the moons of Jupiter and back within a decade using fusion, and the reason